I can't tell one company from another, to be honest with you. It's all AI plus we do something and then this is revolutionary and I'm like, okay, great. You're the seventh company in a row, right? Doing the same thing. Well, look, if I were going to build a new startup today, I'm my first-time founder, I want to build something, what do I do?
Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Gökhan Polat, an experienced product leader and a founder who's reshaping startup funding with transparent, blockchain-based equity models. Gökhan has spent over a decade scaling ventures, leading product teams, and solving real customer problems through innovative technology. In this episode, we dive into the world of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, exploring how they're revolutionizing startup funding and talent collaboration. Gökhan shares insights into how DAOs enable startups to achieve more with significantly less capital, and why equity ownership is being reimagined as a primary driver for collaboration, and how product strategies are evolving in the AI and Web3 era. If you're a product leader, founder, or someone who's curious about the future of a startup ecosystem, this episode is packed with actionable insights.
Gökhan, what is Research and Development DAO, R&DOW, and how did you end up with it?
Look, it's a very interesting journey, actually. So for the last maybe 12 years, 13 years, we're kind of building, 0 to 1 startups, right? In prop tech, fintech, gig economy, in health tech. And I was really looking for answering the question, what does it take to build a startup in the age of sort of AI impermeating everything and kind of Web3 maturing as a technology? And that kind of led me to I would say, a 7-month journey, actually, because I decided to, I need to kind of jump on this and really try to learn and understand what it all means. Kind of handed over the responsibility I had at my venture builder and the startups I was involved in at the time, and kind of jumped into this. So the idea here is how is it different to kind of build a startup today with those two things in mind? And I tried to kind of build my own project in that way. I had a lot of people that were interested in joining it, interested in building with me, and I eventually decided that there was somebody out there, a team out there who was already doing this, and I want to kind of join forces with them because they had a sort of a gap in their leadership team that kind of perfectly matched what I was doing, and kind of joined forces with them. To give you a little bit of explanation to what R&DOW is and what it is, let me give you some background to this. So the DAO component of the R&DOW name stands for the decentralized autonomous organizations. It is a Web3 term that kind of describes organizations that are not led by a CEO, sort of a board necessarily. It's sort of a more emergent behavior of people trying to contribute to this, akin to how kind of open source projects were back then. But sort of with the force and the power of Web3, you can think about it, is really what DAOs are. The way that R&DOW works is that R&DOW has a core team, and then we have about 7 ventures under R&DOW who are individual sort of startups. And the core team is kind of operating as a venture support partner to these ventures. R&DOW gets funding from different sources and helps get funding for the individual projects to kind of help support them and grow them. And then R&DOW owns a piece of those companies as they grow and scale. Okay, so you can think about it as I call it like a next generation venture builder because it's sort of a venture builder in the image of Web3 and incorporating some of the latest technologies into how you build companies.
So exactly what is the problem that you're trying to solve here?
So the problem you're trying to solve here is I've been in a lot of 0 to 1 companies in my past, and I have seen what it takes to kind of raise the first, pre-seed, raise for some angels, build something, build the wrong thing, build it again, pivot it. And what you end up doing really is to raise a lot of capital early on and kind of get out the hamster wheel of raising more and more money, right? And I think some teams are great at it. And you sort of have a founding, team member who is really good at raising capital, and then others who are a bit more operators in the team who can then take those decisions, take the funding, and spend it responsibly in building the team and making the bets internally. But the reality is that we do tend to see too many startups that raise a lot of money early and then are under pressure to have to kind of build out or take some bets that they don't want to take yet because they need to raise the next round, they need to raise the next round, right? So the problem that I think R&DOW and me in particular that I'm trying to solve for is, how can you build something with an equal sort of strength, might, speed, momentum, while not having to raise that much capital early on, right? My hypothesis is that, the way that we are building ventures in R&DOW, and it's a proven model today, we can create the same value with like 5 times less the capital needed. And there's a couple of different mechanisms that are inherently sort of tools and infrastructure that's inherently to Web3 that make that possible.
How to create more value and less resources?
So one of the things that is, and would love to, we can dive into this in detail, happy to do that. So one of the things I will tell you, for example, is that in a traditional startup today, you have a founding team that kind of splits the company up between 2 or 3 of them typically, right? And then you have some, part of the cap table that is allocated to ESOPs, part of the cap table that's, allocated to being able to raise the capital and the dilution that kind of comes from that eventually. The way that Web3 companies, R&DOW Web3 companies really do this is that we kind of try to weaponize equity, if you want to say this, right? We try to use equity as a way of compensation, not just having to pay them in the full salary that they need to get, right? If you think about it, the model here is that a traditional company, the startup here in the region, let's say raise 500K, the founding team typically owns biggest portion of that, the cap table, and then they actually have to, to get those key contributors, that is like the second layer of the onion, they have to pay them significant amount of capital, right? They have to pay them high salaries because you want to get experienced, good people on board and build on your team. You don't want to have people essentially learning, everybody learning about how to do this. You want to get some experienced people in and start producing with them. So in a way, what we can do with R&DOW is to, for those people that do deserve that compensation, give them a piece of ownership of the company early on, rather than thinking about an ESOP program later. And in that way, we can actually pay them in funds right away, salary right away, sometimes a quarter or a fifth of what we normally pay them, right? So they have a way of earning a piece of the company as they are providing the, being part of the team and doing the work. And we're able to, have more capital stay in the company.
And what else R&DOW is a better model than the current models that we have?
So R&DOW is essentially a talent network, a community-oriented talent network with people from all over the place. Maybe most of them are sort of based in Europe or on the sort of the eastern side of North America, South America. And what they bring to the table is experienced people who actually want to contribute and participate in projects that are meaningful for them. And they're willing to do so without having to get highly paid for it, right? They typically have a part of their job actually getting highly paid for it. I'll give you one example. So there's a guy that is on board with R&DOW, who is a user researcher out of Seattle. Lives in a city that is quite expensive to live in, worked for a lot of kind of big tech companies in the past in the user research teams, and today does projects as well. And at the same time, he contributes essentially for free, right, to R&DOW projects. And he does that because he gets compensated in ownership within the R&DOW sort of ecosystem, and he believes that there is a way to pursue kind of meaningful work and getting a piece of that ownership that's going to be more valuable in the future. It's interesting. I mean, it's a look. It's quite different than the typical kind of startup environment that you have here, but there is no denying the magnitude of this kind of trend, you can say, or what's kind of shaping out there, right? You wouldn't believe the amount of sort of capital going into kind of building technologies that enable essentially the future work in some way or another, right? The specific thing that we do in R&DOW when it comes to a thesis, when it comes to not just the infrastructure and the tooling, but also the kind of stuff that we build with the ventures, is what we call sort of a collab tech, which you can think about as future work. How do we collaborate in future? And let's actually build the tools that we can use internally and have other teams use externally as well as the future work kind of emerges, right? That's sort of the principle behind the kind of the product focus within R&DOW.
Let me make another question. So this is because of Web3, but we currently have in Web2 ESOP structure where we give equity that doesn't mean a lot of things, but maybe on the long term that the startup will go public.
Sure.
Why the solution is better because of Web3?
So the way that ESOPs work generally, right? Not all companies have ESOPs. Not all startups have ESOPs. It's generally a bit of an afterthought for the teams rather than sort of a part of the design initially. ESOPs essentially are a allocation on the cap table that says we're going to allocate this amount of the cap table to our employees, and then we're going to have an agreement between us and the employee that we promise them to give them the stock for their time with us, right? Vesting it over 3 years typically. Now, a lot of people will probably tell you also that I personally haven't had a bad experience, but I've heard a lot of people have bad experience with ESOPs as well, where they didn't get their ESOP, where the company went through some changes and challenges, and there could be a lot of different factors. It doesn't always have to be a kind of founder team issue, but it sort of has a bit of a bad reputation, right? I've had really highly skilled sort of Deliveroo guys, whatnot, told me like, you know what? I don't care about it. Pay me what I'm supposed to get in my monthly salary. I'm expecting this much. I can go down for you because I want to join, whatever. But I don't care about ESOPs, right? And that's a bit of a shame, to be honest with you, right? Because ultimately, what you learn after doing this a couple of times is that actually the value that you generate as part of being part of the company, as part of you putting your blood, sweat, and tears into the company and growing it as a key contributor, right, is the value of the company, right? Why should you not have a carry of that? Why should you not have a piece of that action, right? And frankly, what I've seen over the last year is that I've seen super talented key contributors that were not necessarily part of the founding team initially leave their companies because they kind of gotten their ESOPs and they don't have, they can't get more and like, it's like, I'll go do my own thing now, right? It's really not just a handful. I've actually spoken to maybe 10 to 12 people, like senior head of product, head of technology, senior commercial, team heads who simply said, you know what, I think I can own more of the next thing if I can do it myself.
And it's still in the early days, or you can share a story of an investor or founder who benefited it from R&DOW?
So we are a bit early with the projects we have in R&DOW. And some of these projects are kind of heavily Web3 focused companies, and others are a bit more sort of generalist. So some of them are AI and collaboration kind of focused companies, not at all related to Web3 per se. The couple of companies that I can mention, for example, is so we have a company called Together Crew within R&DOW, who was essentially part of Techstars, was part of a couple of different engagements, still kind of created actually within R&DOW, but sort of took part of different programs. And what they do is they do sort of community analytics when it comes to mainly Discord servers, but other sort of community debate forums as well. The problem they're trying to solve is, okay, look, community building is an inherent part of building, users and engaging with users. And it's going to be part of the future. It's a kind of a big trend. It's going to be part of every company to be able to work with their community. How do you identify people in the community that are potential to be great contributors to the community? How do you actually try to maybe save certain people who are kind of getting disengaged in the community, right? So they do sort of analytics, they do some AI into the discourse, basic discussions within there, and they've been quite successful in getting on board quite a lot of organizations who are looking to understand their communities better, right? This company has been, getting more and more funding, both initially from R&DOW, but from outside as well, and have grown their team significantly over the last year.
That's amazing. Now I want to switch to another topic, but it was
Sure.
very interesting for me to learn more about R&DOW. Because you're a product guy, what kind of strategies you implement to ensure rapid product launches without compromising on quality?
For sure, and it's something that I spend endless hours trying to think about, and have been spending significant time over the last 6 months. So, within R&DOW, it's actually not a problem to build and ship things. It's actually in Web3 in general, Web3 sort of ecosystem in general, they are a bit like build and release and they will kind of come mindset. It's actually a little bit of a different problem that they have there. It's because in kind of Web3 companies tend to fall in love with a solution, fall in love with a technology, spend time and effort in building something out, combining certain technologies, getting it out there, putting it out there, shipping it, and then eventually finding out, well, where's the traction? No traction is happening, right? So the reason why R&DOW is so interesting in its approach, hence the kind of research and development DAO, is that we actually kind of bring those, early stage teams or even founders into saying, look, how do we actually research better? How do we understand users? How do you understand the market better, right? So one of the key things that was very important for R&DOW was to establish that kind of educational sort of arm within R&DOW to educate the builders within the R&DOW ecosystem, but also being able to kind of take it from the research into materializing it into product decisions, right? So one of the things that we've been heavily thinking about is, okay, look, what kind of research do we need? What kind of understanding do we need? How do we sort of set certain limitations, boundaries within the information that we need to kind of research on in order for us to transfer this into a product decision and then eventually build it, right? So that research and product kind of user research to product has been something that we've been significantly looking at. When it comes to kind of methodologies or ways of doing this, I've been a fan of the Basecamp guys for years. It used to be called 37 Signals. Mm-hmm. And I've incorporated actually different methods and technologies, or not methods and sort of ways of thinking throughout the years. And it's always been incredibly helpful. I find that they are extremely good at understanding the process, removing the fluff around it, getting to the core problem, how to develop something and build something and get it out. So in the last couple of months, one of the biggest projects I have within R&DOW is actually to think about, okay, how do we, and using sort of their model around shaping, betting, and building, how do we incorporate that into a very different space, which is a Web3 kind of based venture builder, right? To give you a little bit of idea what that structure looks like and how we're trying to test it within R&DOW and incorporate it is. So it's going to be, it's basically a 6-week cycle to build something. It's not a 2-week sprint. It's not a 3-week sprint. It's not a weekly sprint. It's actually a 6-week cycle. Okay. And the first 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks of the cycle, you actually have the whole team, let's say 80% even of the tech team's capacity, getting involved in actually user research and understanding of the user, right? The idea here is that you want to actually understand what are the unknowns and the complexities and the learnings you need to understand what to build, right? Early on, so that everybody on the team has an understanding of what to build eventually. They kind of use a hill chart as an example of this. Maybe somebody has seen it. The beginning of the hill chart actually is to take certain features or certain goals you have with the team. You want to push it up the hill, and it's always a bit of struggle, right? But you want to push it up the hill because you want to understand and deal with the complexity, understanding users, understanding the problem deeply. Once you're over the hill with this particular feature, rolling it down essentially is the team building out the feature, right? So it's very important to understand and then be able to implement it, in a very fast way. So what we're doing in R&DOW is to say, look, let's take a look at how we can do a 6-week cycle for a couple of ventures at a time, where we kind of bring them into this methodology. We give them some momentum when it comes to understanding users, betting on particular features to build, help them sort of, build it out and get it released so they can feel that sense of momentum and building. And how do we do that then across 7 different ventures, more ventures to be joining soon, right? So that's been sort of the main thing that I've been thinking about and kind of building some structure around.
I want to ask you regarding product discovery, understanding users. Can you give an example on how did you start those 6 weeks? Give an example of how did you start and how did you take a feature from it?
Sure. Look, I mean, it's pretty traditional in some sense, in that you do want to have a problem statement that everybody sort of can align around. You want to have an understanding of, okay, well, if it's a new project, you want to have that sort of problem statement early on. If it's an existing project you're adding, features to in that 6-week cycle, you want to understand what you're trying to solve for, particularly what kind of users you want to target for. If you have multiple users, which user it is. And we are a big fan of doing research, right? I think that AI is sort of changing the game a little bit when it comes to doing research. AI is impacting everything, but also when it comes to doing user research. But we still do a lot of user research. We kind of follow methodologies around sort of jobs to be done, if you're familiar with that, as a way to kind of, educate the team, being part of the team early on to then conduct user research, interviews with users, potential users, and understand their sort of deeper needs they have around some of these problems they're trying to solve. So that's the methodology that we're using. Typically, recruiting people to research is one of those challenges, right? So there's a bit of a network within the community. There's a bit of a collaboration we have with other entities where we can kind of recruit people that are in the right sort of target audience for the research. And when we sort of recruit them into the program, we do those conducted interview with them. And once we kind of come to a conclusion, we also want to help the team understand how to make sense of the data, right? If you haven't done user research before, or you've done it a couple of times, maybe not in the sort of a successful way, having a team on board that can help you understand the kind of questions and how to kind of have a user interview a user interview session. It's very important, and it's incredibly valuable to have the experience to help you so that you can do it better the next time and the next time.
Can you share a story with me where user research or the insights from the user research impacted the product or the feature?
Sure. So, funny enough, I was a couple of years ago speaking to a product manager who kind of took over some of my responsibilities at Dubizzle. The thing that he mentioned was, look, the stuff that you built, the stuff that you did user research on, I'm still using that. I'm still using that 2 years on. I'm still kind of going back to it and using it again and informing decisions internally, right? So I think that was really a good thing to hear in terms of that it's generally useful if you can do it right and if you can spend enough time to do it. What happened was, the backstory to this was that the company that I was working for, Masterkey and Airless, we had sort of two companies, one targeting enterprise, one targeting smaller agencies within real estate, was acquired by Dubizzle. And we became part of Dubizzle's kind of organization. We kind of took over some of the Dubizzle to agent kind of B2B relationships and some of the technology there. We took our Airless solutions and kind of skinned it in Dubizzle and took over that, right? And that gave me a little understanding and exposure to actually user research teams within Dubizzle who were doing user research. A couple of Dutch guys, for example, that were doing really good, interesting user research that I didn't get exposure to before, right? So I kind of learned from them a little bit, discovered a few things on my own as well in the process, and spent about 6 months in really interviewing agencies, medium-sized, smaller-sized agencies, understanding what they need essentially from a CRM, a listing tool, right? and conducted about 20 interviews, took those interviews into the learnings that we had from it, using kind of jobs to be done as the methodology to kind of use in the framework here, and essentially created a roadmap based on that, right? Created a sort of a 1-year roadmap for what the listing tools would look like, what are the sort of main features, how to build out the CRM component of it to make it useful. And I thought that was really, really interesting, very valuable. And I got some really good feedback internally that, you know what, hey, we have somebody that knows this, come and present it to other teams. And that was quite fun to do that.
I remember those days vividly. I was in OLX when this acquisition happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But you said that you learned a few stuff from those Dutch guys. Do you know what exactly did you learn from them, or what is the common mistakes that product managers do for user research?
Look, it's a while ago. And to be honest with you, I honestly didn't understand product management as a role, user research as a role, really, until we kind of became part of Dubizzle at the time, right? The thinking I had at the time was the way that I explained this is like, I thought of myself as a bit of a decision-making octopus, right? So, oh, well, this button should be yellow because, you know, X, Y, Z. Hey, this feature should be that way. Let me kind of own all the decisions, right? And what I really learned as being part of Dubizzle at the time, OLX at the time, was that user research and design was sort of a discipline on its own. There are certain, you know, tensions, you can say, between product and user research, right? So first of all, I discovered what that looked like. I became part of those sessions, you know, understand to kind of use some of those tools that the team was using in place. So getting exposure to it in the first place was the first opening act, right? I could also see some of the challenges we had with user research. I remember going to some of these, user interview sessions at agency clients with Zeno, who was one of the user designers at Dubizzle, and kind of going through those questions, you know, participating with him. One of us would take notes and the other person would sort of ask the questions. And I thought, you know what, this is great. I think we're getting very valuable feedback or information about the problems that the agencies are facing. But there's also some other things you could do, right? So I was kind of trying to find my own way as well. What is sort of an effective way to kind of get to this? So that's really was the takeaway for me, right? So it's really a discipline. It's incredibly valuable if you know how to use it. Don't just take frameworks or ideas and just take them and then incorporate them into your solution. Be a bit curious about it. Be a bit more sort of creative around how we do user research, how people sort of regional culture impacts the way that you ask questions, the way that you can or you kind of record certain sessions, like all these different things. You have to kind of adopt it to the environment.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the leadership lessons that you learn managing cross-functional teams across different industries, different nationalities?
So look, there's leadership lessons that you learn as you help kind of teams develop, putting teams together as they grow, as, team members, some exit, new ones join in. The general lessons. And then there is, sort of dedicated teams, cross-functional teams, which are a little bit different. And then there's sort of the whole, cultural component of different sort of mindsets in teams here, right? So I think there's different components to that question. I'm trying to think through it. So let me try to address them a little bit one by one. So first of all, at its core, what I learned is even more so than understanding sort of cultural differences, even more so than understanding a company and how a company operates is what does sort of leadership look like, right? What does leadership look like in its essence? Well, what you are there to do, right, is to make people on your team feel like they are able to grow and develop in accordance with their own goals, right? So if you can find a bit of a if you can find a bit of a sort of fire in them, understand where they want to go with it, understand their career path, understand their thinking, and then able to align the goals that you have for the organization with their goals, I think this is really where you get some sparks of the person giving their their best effort into being part of the team and providing value for the team, right? So I think that was something that I learned throughout this phase with the teams. Another thing that I learned when it comes to here is that I think oftentimes people don't tend to. Let me explain this way. People, leaders in this region as well as particularly, are actually a bit afraid of feeling a bit vulnerable or kind of admitting something that they did wrong or didn't understand well, right? One of the learnings I had through a period of time, both with with Dubizzle, but also later ventures, was to say, look, I'm actually going to be comfortable with saying, look, I don't have an answer to this. Look, it seems like things are a little bit up in the air, and as a leadership team, we don't have a good grasp on it, or we have two to three different opinions here, right? But that's okay, and we are working on trying to get this in a direction that is meaningful for everybody involved. And I need you to be involved in this, right? Don't think about yourself because you are a junior developer or whatever it is, right? Don't think about yourself as simply as executing orders, but I'm generally interested in hearing from you because we need to hear from all sides of the business, right? So I think those are some of the leadership lessons that I have learned over the time and helps me work with both with kind of product and designers that is sort of directly on my team, but also actually the squads that we work with directly, right? So having that relationship with them makes a lot of sense for me, and it has always been very valuable. When it comes to cross-cultural component, let me tackle that a bit separately, right? I think the idea that you're going to have one sort of cohesive way of solving things is a bit of a delusion, right? And because it's a delusion, we sometimes also tend to how can I say, build too many sort of stereotypes also around certain cultures and mindsets and backgrounds, whatnot, right? I think stereotypes obviously is helping in an environment when you have so many different cultures, so many different people from all over the world. But you have to also, again, move this from the stereotype cultural background down to the person themselves again, and understand the person as being component of a team, right? What I would say is that when it comes to kind of challenges with cultures, I can think about a few examples. Actually, I can give you some examples. Probably better to do that. So we had a kind of a regional Middle Eastern UX designer way back when, who was sort of front-end developer, UX designer, ex kind of lawyer, incredibly smart person that studied law and became kind of a UX person and could develop code at the same time, right? And then at the other end, we had sort of developers that were remotely located, that was building on this project, that was basically in Pakistan, right? And then we had sort of a team here of Americans, Canadians, and others in the region here. One of the biggest challenges was really about how to kind of express opinions in meetings in a way that you are contributing to the team's output and not trying to kind of stifle the team or create tension in the team, right? One of the things that we discussed in a leadership team was, okay, look, we have to kind of have a value here that says no aggravation, right? Meaning that whatever, if somebody is solely responsible for aggravating conversation, creating something that is a bit out of the kind of professional environment, we should not tolerate that, right? Either we sort of tell the person to having to understand what the consequences are, right? Or they're not going to be part of the team, right? So with this person, incredibly talented person, we depended on a lot of the early stage stuff that we're building for one of the solutions that eventually became part of Dubizzle. It was really challenging to kind of communicate how the other teams think and how they operate. And eventually, we actually had to part ways, right? Because it didn't really, we're not able to kind of make sense of that environment to make that environment work, right? But there's been other times where we have had challenges like that, and where we're able to essentially bring in a bit of like role play into sort of these situations, build certain structures around where we sort of do some of the collaboration, not with all the bets done, but sort of more of a pre-bet, right? So one example I can give you from 37 Signals actually that I incorporated at the time was that they used to do these things where they did demos. So you know how tech teams, product teams, they do demos for the leadership team, and then they demonstrate what they built in the previous sprint, or sometimes even at an earlier stage, right? And the leadership team has an idea. The main goal really is to get an idea about where they are, what they're trying to solve for, how they can help, and potentially give some feedback that the team can use to correct things, right? Or to improve things. So one of the things that 37 Signals did was they did a demo day after each one of these cycles. And they actually didn't discuss the previous cycle. What they did is, okay, look, we're going to ask everybody in the team to come and pitch what they would put into the next cycle, right? And everybody in the team had to go and to present this feature, discuss the problem, discuss the feature. And the main rule was, this doesn't get done. This is not going to be included in the next backlog. That's the presumption. Don't present with the idea that you're going to put something out there, present something out there, put your time and effort into it, and then it has to be in the next sprint, or it has to be in the backlog. This is an exercise to express ideas so that the whole team can better understand the problems and the solutions as part of that, right? I implemented this with our remote teams in Pakistan, with teams here, and it was one of the really most powerful ways of getting the team to understand each other better, right? And I think that seeped into other parts of the backlog, building the whole, getting our sort of weekly or bi-weekly sprints done, right?
Man, that's so exciting. And I'm hosting the founder of 37 Signals next year. Do you have any other learnings that you learned from them and that you implemented that had tremendous impact on them? And do you have any questions that I can ask the founder as well?
Look, it's a good question. It's a good question. So what do I learn from? Look, I think, one of the things that I read early on was this book called Remote by them, right? So being able to do remote work and what it means, and you've been part of a couple of these companies in the region where it's sort of a bit of a hybrid, and like we don't really know how to do remote well, right? I mean, generally. And then the whole question about accountability and being in the office and those sort of cultural factors come in, right? I remember reading at the time and thinking like, oh, wow, like this is actually, you need to do something different when it comes to remote work, right? How do you sort of create a culture, remote culture, that then is incorporating, different people in different regions? And what do you need to do? What a sort of expectation you need to change around how things work? I think remote really opened my eyes about how to do that. And I also realized in some ways that, look, we're not necessarily geared in these companies that I was part of to actually do remote work well, right? So I think that was a good learning for me in understanding what they were trying to do with remote and how the whole coordination, communication, culture building around remote work would work for them, and how that could be applicable for the right company that you could do. What other questions? Look, what I'm actually very curious about, and I'm sort of how can I say? What I'm very curious about, and what I've been thinking deeply about, is how to incorporate the 37 Signals Basecamp guys thinking on how to build stuff in a Web3 environment, right? I think a lot of people don't think about how that environment perhaps is somewhat similar or somewhat different. And that's something that I'm deeply thinking about, because I generally think that all of these Web3 technologies with the maturing of the infrastructure, with the maturing of the tooling, with the maturing of the jurisdiction, legal frameworks to allow for Web3 companies to operate, there are genuine, huge advantages and different ways of doing things that is very different than how sort of Web2 company works and operates today, right? So I would love to know about how he would think about that in a Web3 environment, or whether he's been thinking about that, how the future work Web3 is going to, can be incorporated into the way that they are doing things.
I love this question, and he never been asked this question before.
Yeah.
Now, you've been very vocal about AI, and one of the problems that AI products have, especially AI, one of the problems that AI products have is they're really hard to build them for non-technical users. How do you approach that?
It's really hard to build them for non-technical users. I kind of don't agree on that premise, actually. I think if there's anything that technologies do, and AI is one of those big things, is that it democratizes the way to build something, and the specialists, the experts would need to kind of double down on their expertise and have a more unique expertise. But anybody else can actually build more and more of these solutions, right? Anybody can sort of program today in one way or another, and it's going to get more like better and faster and easier for anybody to do that. It's incorporating AI as a tool, as a sort of a feature or a way to kind of support a particular tool that you want to build, whether it's analyzing data or generate, like using Gen AI to generate context or information to build a particular solution, or to use it as part of your feature set, right? I think that's going to be easier and easier. You're going to have low-code tools. You're going to have essentially no-code tools that's going to incorporate this already in it and utilize the AI to provide value through those products and services. I think where companies are struggling, or I think the biggest challenge with AI when it comes to startups is that they tend to be taking these solutions off the shelf and incorporating directly into their company without actually having to internalize what it means to kind of use AI, right? It's almost like saying, I've been thinking about this. It's almost like saying, look, this internet thing, it's great. I mean, we don't use it internally, but we build something with it and our customers use it, right? Customers should use it because it's the future. Internally, yeah, we don't really use it, right? So my point really is that you have to have an approach of an inside-out approach, really, right? Is that you have to incorporate actually AI into your kind of the fabric of how you build, how you operate, to really understand what you can do with AI in order for you to then take the next layer out and then say, now we can actually build a solution that's going to be based on AI, but we understand sort of our unique proposition, a unique hypothesis about how we think that we're going to be positioning our tools, our features, our services that incorporate this component of it, right? Because it doesn't happen in the same degree, in my opinion, you get a lot of companies that are similar. I mean, you've been to probably some of these events in the last couple of months, the exhibits that happen, right? I can't tell one company from another, to be honest with you. It's all AI plus we do something, and then this is revolutionary, and I'm like, okay, great. You're the seventh company in a row, right? Doing the same thing. So that internalization and learning and sort of being at the forefront of understanding how this can apply to you, I think is incredibly important.
So there's a little bit of similarities for Web3. So most Web2 companies, they want to implement some flavor from Web3 and they call themselves Web3 companies. And do you think the same thing that's happening, that those companies, they want to implement a little bit of AI and to have it implemented to them, but what you're saying is, no, you have to use Web3 or AI as a building blocks and start from it, or no?
Look, that's my general principle. And look, before AI was the darling of investors and people who want to build companies out of it, right? Web3 was that. I mean, people forget it. Maybe the Bitcoin price going up the last few days has kind of reminded people that Web3 was the thing. But that's exactly what it is, right? I think that taking existing technology, putting it into your at the top of your stack, and then saying we provide this, adding a bit of a speculative element to it, adding a bit of a magic from the AI into it, right? Agentic AI, Web3, all these things. I think it's great. It definitely has a place, right? But do I think the teams understand what they're trying to solve for and how that is uniquely positioned for their view of the world? I don't think so, right? I generally think that it starts with incorporating AI into your kind of internal decision making in product development, in your estimation, your assessment, and your customer service, and it is about incorporating some of these Web3 technologies into your operations, right? This is why when I was thinking about sort of how the future of the startups look like, coming a little bit back to the main point initially, right, is that I think the startups of the future have incorporated AI into their decision making, into their core of the business and how they operate, and they have incorporated elements of Web3 into the way that they operate and they function, right? In the way that they pay their staff members, in the way that they distribute, tokens and ways to sort of compensate them in other ways than the salaries, in the ways that they actually coordinate and collaborate, right? I don't think people understand the level of thinking, time, people that goes into how do we coordinate and collaborate better in Web3, right? And this is going to impact the way that we do collaborate and coordinate in the future. How do we break down a problem? How do we have different people come in and out of a particular group and a setting, right? I'll give you just one quick example. Imagine that you want to hire somebody. We have this problem all the time in startups that we're part of, right? Imagine that you need sort of use a researcher, or you need somebody with a specialized skill set. It could even be a product specialist with a particular background, or a developer that has particular experience and can come in and solve a particular fintech solution that has a regulatory difficulty and component, right? You need that knowledge, right? You want to bring them in. How do you bring them in? You need to create the Slack account for them. You need to create logins for them. You need to give them email, you give them access documentation. What do they get access to? What they don't get access to? What kind of permissions? What do we do? What are the contracts? What are the ways that we compensate them? What do we compensate based on? And hourly or for a particular project to be filled out. All these things are difficulties of the future work presenting itself, right? And I generally see the coordination, compensation, collaboration components of Web3, incorporating that into how you build startups is really it has to be the future, because it's 10 times better than what we have done in the last 10 years, right? That's really where my belief comes from.
Oh God! So you're saying in 5-10 years, the startups of the future is going to be way different than the current startups, and less administration thanks to Web3. AI is going to be built into it, and what then the startup will do?
Look, it's the challenging question to ask is, well, look, if I were going to build a new startup today, I'm my first time founder, I want to build something, what do I do, right? That's the challenging question to ask, because is there a need for another startup Slack, another Slack as a tool, or is there need for yet another Tabby when Tabby is already big in the market, right? The truth is that every time we think we sort of matured a particular industry and we got a lot of funding into the industry, I've been through this loop a couple of times myself, over the years, right? There's always somehow another opportunity comes along, another problem to solve. The market shifts, the world shifts, the belief shifts, the funding shifts, everything shifts in some way or another, even faster and faster, you can say, to kind of enable new opportunities, to new entrants to come in and actually create a bit of a space and own a bit of a space, right? So the reason why I'm kind of coming up with this perspective to you is that the truth, I think, is that to be able to find opportunities in the market that have the right problems, the right timing, the right all those things, you need to be able to be very nimble and pivot, right? And I think AI and Web3 enables you to be more nimble and pivot, okay? So if more and more companies, more and more startups are built in this way, right? That doesn't require that much funding. is nimble, is incorporating some of these, AI tools into the decision making, into the way they build solutions, in the way they offer services, right? Then when you want to start a new company, you have to face this. I mean, this is your competition, right? So it's really all about understanding that what you get yourself into and what the table stake is going to look like in the future, and how you need to kind of build a unique set of beliefs, attributes, knowledge, and build something on top of that that is going to survive in the market.
Great. Man, I still have like hundreds of questions that I haven't even covered, but we ran out of time. Where can our audience find you? How can our audience be useful or a help to you?
Sure. Look, I'm genuinely spend like my last year, I would say, even thinking about this problem and trying to have others maybe see what the future looks like when it comes to building startups, right? If you want to understand about what we do with R&DOW, you can go on to R&DOW.io, which is the website. It's going to go through a lot of changes. We recently got some funding for the project from one of the largest L2s out there. So it's gonna change and develop a lot, and I'm gonna be a big part of that. So go ahead and check out R&DOW. Be part of the ecosystem. Eventually participate in the project. Get paid for the project and have a piece of those companies. I think that's a good way to do it. Other than that, I think keep an eye on sort of LinkedIn is going to be the source, because I also want to be able to, communicate to the regional, especially in the region here, about how I think things might want to change and maybe shake people up a little bit in terms of their beliefs and what's going to happen in the future.